Welcome, everyone. I am Evie, and I am the Headwaters River Journey Manager. Today, for our speaker series, we have Jessica Thrasher joining us to talk about changing the conversation about rain and stormwater. Jessica is the Education and Outreach Manager for the Colorado Stormwater Center at Colorado State University. She has a bachelor's degree in sociology from Southern Methodist University and a master's degree in international development anthropology from Colorado State University. Jessica provides tools, educational opportunities, and research to municipalities, stormwater professionals, consulting firms, and community members, allowing them to make informed decisions about stormwater management practices. She is dedicated to being a part of creating solutions to the current water quality, supply, use, and conservation issues. Jessica has also attained the following certifications: Permaculture Designer, Rainwater Harvesting Practitioner, Qualified Water Efficient Landscaper, and Stormwater Control Measure Inspection and Maintenance. We are so excited to have you here with us, and I will hand the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Evie, and really appreciate being invited to come present with you today. I have titled this presentation, Changing the Conversation Around Rain and Stormwater, because the way that we view rainwater and stormwater is one of the big things that we need to talk about today. So thank you for the introduction. Here is some of my qualifications, but also my contact information. So if you have any questions after this presentation today, that's where you can reach me. I'm sure that many of you have not heard of the Colorado Stormwater Center. We are a part of Colorado State University within the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department. I am in Fort Collins, Colorado. I'm on campus, which I love. The students bring so much energy to campus, and it's really nice just to be in this atmosphere. So our mission is to advance stormwater management throughout Colorado by conducting practical research and providing education and training opportunities like this one. We do a lot more. We also have two kind of flagship certifications: our Stormwater Control Measure Inspection and Maintenance certification, and then our Stormwater Control Measure Design and Design Review certification. Throughout the presentation, you will see these blue lettering. All of the blue lettering are links. And so you will have access to this presentation afterwards and be able to navigate to all of these links to learn more if you're interested. We have an annual stormwater symposium. The recordings from our last year's symposium are linked here. Last year, we talked about the impacts of fire on water quality, green infrastructure in action, and different innovative stormwater education and training programs across the state. The recordings and presentations are all available via that link. We also do a great deal of stormwater research, which you can learn more about there. And we have also been engaging in language justice. And language justice is that people are able to receive information in the language that they feel most comfortable speaking and receiving information in. And so we have been focused on doing Spanish interpretation and translating our content into Spanish to make it available to our Spanish-speaking community members. So the following presentations we have recordings of in English and in Spanish. The English recordings you will be able to see both English and Spanish on both recordings. So we have a green infrastructure overview, one on commercial rain gardens, and then one looking at extended detention basins. We are going to be continuing to increase our Spanish resources, and we'll be putting a specific Spanish page on our website where you can view all of the resources that we have. That will be coming soon. So today we are going to be talking about really, why are we having this conversation today? Why are we talking about water conservation, stormwater? What is rainwater harvesting? And you might be thinking, well, you just said stormwater. What does rainwater harvesting have to do with anything? The way that I describe it is rainwater harvesting is really what the term for at your own home. So as a residential scale, and stormwater management is basically managing that same resource, but at a municipal or at a larger scale, like a city scale. And then we'll be talking about green infrastructure, some additional resources as well. So the first thing is, why are we talking about the need to take advantage of other types of water? Why are we looking at rainwater or stormwater management? And that is because of decreased water availability in Colorado in general. It's a little bit different on the West Slope. You all receive a lot more water than we do, but as a whole in Colorado, we're seeing a lot less water available and more droughts. So we've seen this year in particular. In addition to that, we have increases in population. Folks like myself came to visit Colorado, loved it, and stayed. We're seeing huge increases in our population in Colorado, which further puts pressure on our water supply. We also have increasing priorities for water on the river. Now, what does that mean? So very, very briefly, I'll talk about water law. In Colorado, water law is dictated by the doctrine of prior appropriations, which means first in time, first in right. The first people to move here and use water for a beneficial use received the most senior water rights. So in Colorado, those are agriculture. Agriculture was the first use that water was put to for a beneficial purpose. Now we have a lot of other uses on the river, which include municipal use. Our drinking water comes from the river. We have recreation, fishing and boating, and there's all people do float trips down the river. So how much water needs to be in the river to recreate? And then we also have our ecological benefits, or the priority, which how much water needs to be in the river for fish, for aquatic habitats. And then we have commercial uses as well. And so there are a lot of different opinions about how the water should be used, and then different sources or different ways we want to use that water. Further complicating things is climate change. As we have all seen, we've had a lot of fires and drought. Those two are connected. When our forests are not hydrated sufficiently, they are more vulnerable to fire, and then fire is able to burn hotter and longer, as we have seen very devastating fires the last few years. Once these fires burn hotter, and what they do to the soil is they make it hydrophobic, and so water is no longer able to absorb into the forests. And so basically the way that I kind of picture this is it's like we've paved the forest, because water is no longer able to absorb into the forest, and then it just runs off. And so one of our main kind of aquifers or storage is in our forest systems, and the water makes its way more slowly to our rivers. But when we don't have that, we have more ash and debris that's being deposited very quickly into our rivers, and then it's difficult to clean that back out. And then finally, we have high water use. So just to kind of illustrate this, in our summer months, half of the water that is used on outdoor irrigation, and the average American uses approximately 160 to 200 gallons of water per day. So 80 to 100 gallons of that is used on our outdoor landscapes in the summertime. And most of that is used on our lawns. So to kind of put this in perspective, I wanted to think about this in a different way. So let's just imagine that we're looking at a lawn that's roughly 100 square feet, which is about the size of an SUV. Okay, so that size lawn will require 124 to 186 gallons of water per week. And that might not sound like that much, so that's either 2 times or 3 times. So if it's 2 times a week, it's a 124 gallons. If it's 3 times per week, it's 186 gallons. So that might not sound like that much water. So I wanted to put it in the perspective of the town of Winter Park. So the town of Winter Park, let's just say approximately a little over 2,000 homes, or a little under 3,000 homes. If we assume that all of those homes have about an SUV size lawn, then the town of Winter Park is using over 500,000 gallons of water per week to water those lawns. So that water adds up quickly. As you can see here, 50% on outdoor use, but inside our homes, we also use a lot of water. The main water user in our home is actually our toilet, with 12% of our water going to our toilet, and then 11% for our shower, 1% for bath. But one of the ones that I like to just point out is the 5% for leaks, which is a lot of water. I live on a little bit of property in the Fort Collins area, and this one time we had goats, and we had this spigot out in our field where we water the goats from. Well, one of the goats was able to turn on our spigot at full blast using its horn, and it ran for a day, and we had no idea that it was on. And so because of the massive amount of water that leaked during that goat incident, as we call it at our house, the water provider actually came to our house to see if our meter was broken. So, and then we had to pay an enormous water bill. So because that was such a traumatic experience of having that much water being wasted, we now have something called Eye on Water. And so I have an app that monitors our leakage, and it will alert me if there isn't a leak above a certain threshold. And so this is something that you might want to look into if you're having issues with leaks. You'd be surprised about how much water is lost from leaks. So your municipality might offer these smart water meters, and it's worth asking. When I called and asked my municipality about it, they came and gave me a smart, they just changed it out right away for me. And it was no cost, and it was great. The last thing I like to point out on this slide is the dishwasher, because I have kids and I run my dishwasher daily. And so you might be like, well, 1% is pretty low. That's because they're very water efficient. So I love this graphic here by WaterSense because it just shows how easy it is for water to be wasted, and we don't know how much we're using. There's no gallons per hour that we see. We just see water coming out and then it running. So this is something, now that we know how much water we use and where water is going kind of in our house, we know what the problem is. What we can do about it is purchase WaterSense products. These are products that are certified through a third party to ensure the water efficiency standards. And in fact, in Colorado, they're now required. So if you have a new shower put in, it has to be WaterSense. But they have all sorts of different products, from toilets all the way to irrigation controllers. And that blue link will take you to that website. So if you're looking to make these changes, you might as well check with your water provider, because there are so many water providers that are providing rebates when you're making these changes. So they can do irrigation rebates, they can do indoor water efficiency rebates, high efficiency toilet rebates, clothes washer rebates. So if you're looking to make these changes in your home, you should get money back. So get money back for making these WaterSense choices. Your municipality might also, or your water provider might also offer discounts for lawn removal. You could get grants for removing turf and installing xeric landscaping, free outdoor irrigation audits. The irrigation audits will come and they'll measure your sprinklers to see how efficient they are at watering your lawn, because usually most of our sprinkler systems are putting too much water on our lawns, and that our lawns can actually look better and be more resistant to drought if we water them less. So check with your water provider and see what you qualify for. Okay, so now let's talk about rainwater harvesting. What is rainwater harvesting? It is the collecting, storing, and putting rainwater runoff to use at your house. The easiest way to look at this is by collecting it using your existing gutter system. So I really like this picture of this house because it shows you that the entire front of the house, all of the roof, is connected to a downspout, a gutter and a downspout, which goes to one location. And so if you're looking at here, this is where you can see all of the water is going to this part of the house. So I will guarantee you that that part is soggy, that they are having so much water. I'm sure they're having issues. It's right next to their foundation. And so this would be a perfect spot to utilize some of the rainwater harvesting techniques that we will be talking about. One of the principles of rainwater harvesting is, how do you put water to beneficial use? If you have a problem where you're having pooling, if there's mosquitoes there because the water is just sitting there, how can you use the water beneficially instead? Why should we use rainwater? Because it's free. It will reduce our demand for treated municipal water, which is our drinking water, and it'll help us save money on our water bills. water rates are going to increase. We talked about how the stress on our water system right now, and one way to address that is to charge people for using very large amounts of water. And plants love it. So this is a side story, but Arizona uses the Colorado River for their water. And so do we on the Front Range. I know it's different kind of where you are, but on the Front Range, we use a lot of Colorado River water. By the time it gets to Arizona, it's been used and reused so many times that the salt content in the water is very high. Because of that, it leaves little salt rings around where you do your irrigation. And the only way to get that salt out is to flush it with rainwater, because there's no salt in rainwater. So this strategy of rainwater harvesting has been used very successfully in Arizona, where they receive much less water than we do. Which brings me to my next question that I get a lot, which is rainwater harvesting sounds great, but we don't get that much rain in Colorado. So how does that even work here? Well, in Winter Park, I'm very jealous. You all get 23.7 inches per year. On the Front Range in Fort Collins, we get 16 inches per year. But 1 inch of rain on a 1,000 square foot roof will yield over 600 gallons of water. So that same roof line would yield over 14,000 gallons per year in Winter Park. So there is plenty of water to collect for rainwater harvesting. So here are some of the principles of rainwater harvesting. These are taken from the Rainwater Harvesting for the Drylands and Beyond books by Brad Lancaster, which are fantastic. I highly recommend them if you are interested in learning more after my talk about what those are. I highly recommend looking into his books. So the first thing that we need to do with rainwater harvesting is look at our site, look at our home, and start by looking at long, thoughtful observation. Are there any drainage issues do you have? Are there any areas that are problematic, that they're collecting too much water, that we could turn those problems into resources? So for example, this is my house between my barn and my chicken coop. And as you can see, there's a ton of snow that won't melt, and it collects in between those two spaces. So that is not where I want the water to go, because it creates a very slick and icy stairway to get into my barn. So what I want to have happen instead is, one of the things that I did is I put a gutter on the back side of my chicken coop, because all of the water was draining right here. And then I also put a gutter on my barn so that I could direct the water in a different way, so it could water plants with gravity instead of coming right here. So these are all ways that you can look at, how can I turn this problem area into a resource? This is another example. This is my driveway, and all of the water was ending at the bottom of my driveway, which was just a hassle. You know, we didn't want it to go there. So my whole property slopes this way. So what I did is I put into effect rainwater harvesting earthworks, which we'll talk about here in a moment, a series of them to collect the water, because you always want to start at the top of your watershed and make changes, because by the time you get to the bottom of your watershed or the bottom area of your house, it is very hard to make water go uphill. You need a pump to make that happen. So it's much easier to start doing that, start uphill, so that you can change where it will be before it hits the bottom, like this. So the top of your watershed is usually your roof line, but if you live next to a large hill, it might be the hill. So we look at your watershed, or all of the water that falls onto your property is your watershed. And then you look at the way that your watershed will flow from the top to the bottom. So what we want to do is we want to slow the water down, spread it out, and sink it into the ground. So if you're thinking about a type of rainstorms that we get in Colorado, they're usually very fast and very hard rainstorms. Because of our clay soil and the fact that our homes are mostly built on a slope, that means that all of the water runs quickly off of our landscapes. Now, this was done, our homes were built that way for a good reason. That, you know, we don't want water sitting on next to our foundation, creating problems. But this mindset was also looking at stormwater as a waste product. of getting stormwater or rainwater away from our house as quickly as possible into the storm drain and away. So the way that rainwater harvesting looks at it instead is, how can we keep the water on our property and soak it into the ground so there isn't a bunch of water leaving our site. So if we were to look at this from the way that our homes are typically built, so we move rain away from our house as quickly as possible, and then we get out our hose, our clean drinking water, and then water our plants. So instead, let's look at the rainfall that is falling on our property as a way that we can water our plants, instead of having to rely solely on the resource of our spigot and our cleaned drinking water. Other ways that you can direct the water, not only from your roof, but also from hard surfaces like your driveway, your sidewalks, and different areas like that, you can also use that water. So here's a couple of examples. What I love about the concepts around rainwater harvesting are they're looking at very small solutions, what one person can do by hand. So during COVID, I had a little bit extra time on my hands. So I decided to transition my landscape. So before I showed you that picture, this is my driveway, and I showed you how my whole property sloped. So this is the uphill of it. And I was looking at changing how the water flowed across my surface of my home. So what I did was I started utilizing one of the rainwater harvesting strategies, which is creating berms and basins. A berm is a building up of soil right here to keep the water in, so it has time to infiltrate into the soil. And this is the basin or the depression where water will collect and have time to soak in. And so this is a picture kind of looking at this from another direction. Rainwater harvesting also does stacking functions, which we don't just dig a hole and leave it there. We dig a basin, which is essentially a hole. We put mulch in there and then we plant it. So you have the watering, the water is sitting there, it's watering this apple tree, where now I'm able to get food for my family. Then I planted native plants in there to bring the pollinators I need to pollinate my tree and provide other beneficial areas and habitat for other wildlife pollinators. Here is another just look at the principles of rainwater harvesting. So here, let me get my PowerPointer back. Here we go. Here we have the water is running this way across my landscape. There was a tree planted with weed fabric, and as the tree grew, it made it into a dome. So water is running quickly away from the tree whenever it rains. So instead, what I did is I removed the weed barrier and the soil, and I created this basin and this berm so that whenever it rained, the water would sit around my tree. I'm not creating a pond. I'm just creating opportunities for the water to slow down and sink into the soil. And so sometimes people ask me, well, I don't want a bunch of holes in my yard. But that's not what it looks like. So as you can see, it's covered with mulch and you can hardly see it. So here are these different types of rainwater harvesting systems. I know we talked about them already, some of those concepts and principles. But when we talk about the two main types of rainwater harvesting systems, we look at passive systems, which are using gravity to direct and slow the flow of water to allow for infiltration. And passive systems collect substantially more water than active systems. An example of that is rain gardens. And active systems are where you collect and store water for future use. An example of that is rain barrels. So I'm not sure if you all knew, but before 2016, rainwater harvesting was illegal in Colorado. It was one of the only states that had any restrictions on rainwater harvesting. But in 2016, it was legalized for the very first time, and that was a great day. But there are still some restrictions on what we can do with rainwater harvesting, specifically in rain barrels. So the laws or the regulations for Colorado are that you can have a maximum of 2 rain barrels with a combined storage capacity of 110 gallons or less. So this means, unfortunately, that you can't have 3 40-gallon rain barrels. So you can only have 2. So because of that, we recommend the 55-gallon rain barrels, because then you can maximize that 110 total gallons. You can only use it for outdoor purposes, watering your lawns or plants or gardens. The container has to have a sealable lid, and this is to prevent mosquito breeding. We don't want big containers of water sitting next to our house that allow more opportunities for mosquitoes. And then you can't drink or cook water from a rain barrel. It's not treated and it can make you really sick. Also your pets. So I was talking with someone one time and they asked me if they could use a rain barrel for their chickens. And I said, I don't recommend that, because you're getting the particulates that are coming off of the roof line. And let's just imagine that's pet or that's bird droppings. That can be ash, that can be pollen, it can be dirt, it can be all sorts of things. And then when it sits in the rain barrel, then it just becomes contaminated. So, you don't want to risk animals being sick. Side note or side story, in Arizona, actually, there are no restrictions on rainwater harvesting. And so there they do use it for drinking a lot. But they have very specialized systems for purifying that water. And of course, they have to meet their local state and city codes to do that. So in other states, it is allowed, but we're not quite there yet in Colorado. There are a lot of different ways that you can hook up a rain barrel to your house, but this is the way that I recommend, the system that I recommend, or that we recommend rather, in Colorado, and it is a rain barrel with a diverter. A diverter is right here, and this is moving water from your downspout into the barrel. And the reason why we recommend this, I'm not sure if you all have seen where they have cut the downspout and it just goes directly into the rain barrel. That's another very common way that it is done. The reason why we don't recommend that is because with our climate here, you have to remove your rain barrel over the winter or it'll freeze and possibly explode, crack. Not explode, that's dramatic. It will crack. And so then you have to move your rain barrel, but then you have to add on, you have this cut downspout now and water is just falling next to your foundation. So then you have to put on a downspout extender. And so it's just kind of more of a hassle. So instead, I recommend this diverter. And then what you do in the winter time is you just remove this hose, empty your rain barrel, and store your rain barrel. Additionally, when you have a system where all of the water goes directly into your rain barrel, when the rain barrel fills up, where does that extra water go? So you need an overflow. So what I like about this diverter system is that the overflow just goes down your existing downspout. So there's not anything extra that you have to install. It's just, it already goes where it should go. So easy installation, clean out, and easy winterization as well. I don't have time to go into exactly how to install your rain barrel today. So I included here a recording to conserving water in the garden with rain barrels. I will also send, we have a guide. I thought I had it right here, but I don't. We have a newly created resource of how to install your rain barrel at your home. It's the new guide. We have it in English currently, and we are also translating it into Spanish. So I will make those resources available, and you can hopefully get them through Evie. So you can use rain barrel water to water a number of things. You can use your food production gardens, maybe hanging pots that you have. You can use them for greenhouses, and then also to establish your native plants and rain gardens. So you might be wondering, wait a minute, I thought you just told me that rainwater is contaminated. Why would I put it on my garden? Great question. So the reason why it works to put it on your garden is there was a study that was done, and I cannot remember the university that did it off the top of my head, but there was a study that was done to see if it was safe to use rainwater on vegetables and plants. So what they determined, they hyper polluted, they got all these different samples of different types of roofs, and then they hyper polluted them more than we would have at our house. Then they simulated the rain events and collected the water. So what they found out is, yes, there are contaminants that come off of asphalt shingling, all the different kinds of roofs that they used. And then they put it on plants, onto the soil of the gardens. And then they tested the vegetables to see if they were still contaminated. And they found that they were not, because soil cleans the contaminants out. My caveat to that is, if you are growing leafy greens, since your water will directly contact those leaves and you'll be directly eating those leaves, that you use drinking water for those. If you have carrots, carrots are great. You can water with rainwater. Tomatoes, what else? Potatoes are great. There's a lot of different vegetables, but my point is leafy greens, I would stay away from using rainwater, and then just use your drinking water for those. But otherwise, very safe to use it on your plants. So I mentioned earlier rain gardens. So what is a rain garden? A rain garden is most simply a garden watered by the rain. We're bringing back this basin term that I was mentioning, and berm. So water is directed from your downspout into a depression or a basin. And then we have a berm up here, which is a buildup of soil just to keep water in your basin. So again, we're not making a pond. That is illegal. This is not lining it with anything. We're just slowing down or creating more opportunities for water to infiltrate. Additionally, one key component to this is native plants, because native plants are adapted to our climate. They're drought tolerant. The vegetation also breaks up our clay soil and increases the rate of infiltration. When a garden is watered by the rain, this means that once they're established, it takes 2 to 3 years for native plants to establish. Once they are established, they only need to be watered by the rain. You don't have to irrigate them unless it is extremely dry, which is great. Everybody has more time in their day. Additionally, mulch is very critical to the success of a rain garden, because it acts as this super absorbent sponge, helps prevent weeds. Unfortunately, there's no magic pill for no weeds. And then it insulates the soil and also reduces evaporation. So keeping that water available to those plants for longer. And we'll look at some examples here. So as I mentioned, you're able to collect a lot more rain with a rain garden. So here, 55 gallon, this is a 55 gallon rain barrel. And guess what? There's 55 gallons of water in there. Here is my rain garden when I was building it. And there are 71.25 gallons of water in that. And as you can see, it has the capacity to hold a lot more water. You might be wondering, how do you know there's 71.25 gallons in that rain garden? Well, I turned off all the water in my house. I checked my water meter, and then I calculated how much water I used to get that amount for you. If you want to know how to install your own rain garden, we'll look at some examples here momentarily, but here is another link to a video of rain gardens and their benefits, and this is how to put one at your own home. We do have this in English and in Spanish as well. So let's look at some examples of what this really looks like, because I'm a visual person. I need to see what this looks like. And so I have a lot of examples to see what this looks like in practice. Okay, so as I mentioned to you, my chicken coop, here it is. Here are my chickens. Here's my chicken coop. As you can see, there is no gutter here. Here I had about 8 roses. I had weed barrier, and then I had rock on top of that. And as you can see, not attractive. It wasn't really adding very much to our landscape. And, you know, roses are pretty, but they take a lot of water. So what I did instead is I ripped all of that out, which took a while. And then I planted what you can see on the right. We added it in a downspout and a gutter, and then directed it to create this rain garden. So I'll show you how I got there. So there's the before picture. I didn't put a picture of me ripping out everything, but you can use your imagination there. And then planting day was May 17th. And I always like to show this picture here of the day that it was planted, because a lot of people might think, whoa, that is too much mulch. I cannot do it. Like, I don't want to just look at mulch. But I wanted to show you what it looked like just a few months later, like how much the plants grew, how beautiful they filled in, and you don't see the mulch like that. So just be patient with your native plants. They take a while to grow to their full height, but it doesn't take them all that long, and so you won't be looking at a ton of mulch. But I really like this example of just showing it's in my backyard. I did it myself with my kids, and then we made this transition. Also, since I planted all of these native plants, I planted specific plants that attracted native pollinators, including hummingbirds. And so for the very first time after planting this garden, I had hummingbirds in my backyard. And I also had hummingbird moths, which I didn't even know what that was before I saw one in my backyard. So it has been just really amazing to see how this small change that I did in my yard has impacted our local ecosystem. So here's a couple of other examples. I was honored to be asked to participate in installing some rain gardens with Groundwork Denver last year. And so I wanted to show you I love landscape transformations because they're so satisfying to watch. You can you start with nothing, you start with a blank slate, and then you get to see the end of your 4 hours. It took us 4 hours to install this rain garden, all the work, that you put in. So here is before we got started. Right here is where the rain garden is going to go. So we started laying out the rain garden dimensions, and then you just get started, you dig in, pun intended, and you start building up. You can see your berm here, the beginnings of the berm, the beginnings of the basin, see that coming together. And then of course you need your plants. So we started laying out what the plants where the plants would be. You want to make sure that you're planting them far enough apart so that they are at their mature sizes, so you don't plant things too close together. Whenever you have water coming into an area that's been concentrated, so you're bringing water to a single point to enter into this rain garden, you need to have erosion protection. Otherwise, the water will just eat away of where that soil is and it'll create a hole. So you need to put rocks, something to distribute the water more evenly so it can enter into the rain garden. And then we have it planted here. As you can see, I love native grasses. These are just beautiful. And then we always take pictures before mulch is put in, because after mulch is put in, you can't see the water moving. So we test it by putting a hose into this downspout, and then you can see where the water flows. I like to think of myself as a rain garden artist, because once the final plants are in place and once the water is coming in, you can kind of move the soil and make sure that it is able to flow how you want it to flow. So I consider that kind of the final adjustments. And here in this final picture, you can see what it looks like filling up with water and how it distributes along the bottom. A rain garden fills up like a bathtub. So you want it to be flat along the bottom, and then it fills up slowly. And so the plants that you plant at the bottom have to be able to handle more frequent water and having it sitting in water the longest. And then the plants at the top need less water and are more your xeric plants. And so here you can see that the final stage is adding that mulch, because mulch is very critical to it. But once again, it's difficult to see the water flowing once you put the mulch on. So here is a next site. Each site is just like so unique and interesting. I want to point out something that we found when we were there. So as you can see right here, there is undercutting happening on this site with this driveway. So water is coming underneath here, and then it's making this erosion happen right here. Okay. So this is the before site. This is where the rain garden will be placed. We did our calculations and laid out where the rain garden will go. And then we needed to add a gutter extension to get the water where we wanted it to go for the rain garden. And there's my son helping. And so here we can see the beginnings of our berm and our basin here. And so like I mentioned, this was a super interesting site because the water was coming from this side of the garage for this property. This is the property we were focusing on, but the water was also coming directly from the neighbor's yard or the neighbor's house where this downspout was spilling right here as well. So that's why we were having that undercutting. So adding in this rain garden not only helped the property of the person that we were working with, but the neighbor, because they were going to get a cracked driveway sometime soon. So rain gardens solve all your problems is really what I'm trying to say. So here is, we were looking at then once we had our bottom basin built, then putting in our plants. We put our erosion protection in right here, same as on our other one. You can see just how beautiful the plants are already. Here is when the water is coming in, it's filling up like that bathtub, like we like to see. And then we also determined, a lot of this is trial and error. Because you know your site best, you might try something, and that's why rainwater harvesting, with it being small scale, is just so neat, because you're not spending thousands upon thousands of dollars to put in this rain garden. It's very cost effective, and if something doesn't work, you can tweak it without it having to rip out everything and start over. So for example, you can see here that we're putting this cobble. So the water would run off this brick and on to this cobble to get down here, because it's a pretty good slope. And you can see from this final picture, the cobble's gone and we have this flat rock. That is because we tested it and saw the cobble wasn't going to distribute the water evenly enough to make it so that it worked. The erosion was happening almost immediately. So we put that flatter that rock there to help distribute that water and keep that erosion protection for that garden. So here is the final, what they decided for their mulch, and that rain garden is complete. So when we talk about stacking beneficial functions, we're talking about not only you're cleaning water. So the water from your roof is dirty, you put it into a rain garden, it cleans the water, it soaks into the groundwater, and so you are protecting water quality. The other thing is, some folks have said to me, well, you're slowing water down that would have gone to the river. And so, how is that water? You're harming someone's water right. And so and also with rain barrels, they've also mentioned that. And the way that I describe that, or my answer to that, is unless you're filling up your rain barrel and taking it into a different watershed, the water is still being used on your property and will make its way to the river. Actually, we are holding that water for a longer period of time, because when we have all paved surfaces, our water goes it rains and it's immediately in the river, basically. And so that is creating bumps in our hydrograph, peaks in our hydrograph. So all the water gets immediately to the river. When we have these rainwater harvesting systems in place, then the water is allowed to sink, get cleaned, and then make its way into the groundwater, which then makes its way more slowly to the river, so that we have more water available to us later. Because when it's raining, we don't need the water. And our rainy season is typically June, July, sometimes July, sometimes a little bit in August, but we need our water in August, September, late September. So by having these water harvesting features, we're allowing the water to make its way more slowly to the river, so we have the water when we need it. It's additionally benefiting wildlife. It creates this oasis. It adds beauty to your yard, has fragrance and shade and food production. I planted certain plants in front of my chicken coop because my chickens are great, but they don't smell the best. So I picked some flowers that were especially fragrant to help with some of that experience in the backyard with some of the chicken smell. So then I wanted to show you, I will pull this up after I finish my presentation, but if I don't have time to get to this, Columbine Landscapes has these really great examples. They are in Durango, but they have a focus on rain gardens. And so I highly encourage you, if you have time, to check out their website. I'll try to pull it up here momentarily to show you, because they have these great examples of what different types of rain gardens can look like in your yard, so you can see how beautiful they are when incorporated. So if we just look at water a different way, one of the things, if you could discover a new water source tomorrow, you would be a gajillionaire, because everyone is looking for the next water source when we have it already. We have it available to us through rain and stormwater by looking at it as a resource, something that we can use beneficially for our landscapes. One of the things that I talk about in the water community a lot is xeric plantings. I'm not sure if you've heard about xeric, but xeric is a low water type of landscape, but a lot of people think of xeric as rock only. And in Arizona, I don't know if you've seen these pictures where they have rock front yards. And so that isn't what we're saying. That isn't the type of landscape that we have to have here in Colorado. There are so many beautiful native plants that require low water, xeric plants, very little water. And so we don't have to have no landscape, but we need to have water efficient Colorado type of landscapes that aren't dependent on a substantial amount of water from the drinking water that we're using. So if we make some small changes in our communities, we can save our drinking water for drinking and use that rainwater to water our landscapes, which will help build sustainable communities and ensure that we have water for future generations. I love resources, so I have incorporated a ton of them for you with my contact information, of course, but here's a bunch of different resources for you to look at. If you're curious about what types of native plants there are on the Front Range, there is a link for you. The high altitude native plants are different. So if you are higher altitude, I encourage you to look for those. And I would like to take a moment. There are a few more videos. This one is actually a really cool video. It's 4 minutes long, and it's on how this Elk Grove in California transitioned one of their community spaces to incorporate rain gardens into this rain garden plaza, where they have a demonstration area and then a ton of native plants. And so that video, I just really like seeing how successful that's been in their community. And then I forgot that I included this, but I included a couple of my favorite native plants because I just love seeing them. So this one that is pictured here is called chocolate flower, and it's a cascading, like, beautiful flower, and it seriously smells like Hershey's chocolate. I'm not joking. I thought my kids were going to try to eat it, but they haven't yet. But it smells like Hershey's chocolate. It is the craziest thing and just beautiful. If you're looking for some shrubs, the golden currant, I really like this one. I mean, you can eat the fruit, which is great. I have planted the Rocky Mountain maple and the Rocky Mountain juniper in my yard, both really great trees. And then I have so many favorite perennials, but hyssops are the ones that hummingbirds just love. They're also called hummingbird mint. And then penstemons, pretty much any penstemon I love because they're just so beautiful. And then wine cups are a ground cover, and they just kind of explode everywhere, which I just think is so fun. And then harebells, I'm originally from Texas, and so bluebells is the flower of Texas, and harebells remind me of bluebells. But if you go hiking in the mountains, you'll see them everywhere. They're these tiny little bluebells, and they're just beautiful. And they're also shade tolerant, so I've used those in my partial shade rain gardens. And just to show, rainwater harvesting strategies are also they're also greatly used with fire and helping to restore fire areas, because you can slow down the water, help infiltrate the water, reduce the flooding impacts, because fire and flooding are very closely connected. And then it helps benefit water quality as well. So just wanted to point that out. And here are some of my favorite grasses, little blue stem and blue grama. I just think that they add so much texture, and they're also over winter. They have really great winter interest. And as well, just like talking about how to care for some native plants. Native plants, when you keep your grasses and your native plants, you don't cut them in the winter time, because then you have winter food for birds and other pollinators, or not pollinators, but other wildlife who can like hide in it or create or use it to create habitat. And one of the plants that I can go on a tangent about plants for a while, but one of the plants that I really was surprised by is salvia. And salvia is purple. And I have a lot of it. It's very drought tolerant. I have a lot of it in my yard. And I was seeing these little house finches in it. I was like, what are they doing? And then I was starting to see that there were little broken stems of my salvia. And then I found out the house finches were eating the seeds in there. I thought that was so cool. So there are so many different wildlife that are reliant on our native plants. And just by creating these habitats for them, we're able to make space in our space for them, the ones that was originally theirs in the first place. So I want to leave time for questions, but I do want to, if you can bear with me for a moment, show you some examples. Oops, let me stop my sharing. Okay, examples of the Columbine Landscapes. So just bear with me momentarily, because they have really cool pictures. I can get it to come up. Oh, if I may share my screen again, please. Loading. If you have any questions, I can answer before. Oh, there we go. Okay, so can you see my screen? Do you see the Columbine Landscapes? Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so let me take those off, sorry about that. So I want to show you this page. So it's Columbine Landscapes Rain Gardens. And then bear with the scrolling. Okay, so I love that they have before and after pictures of this. And then you can see what it looked like during the transition process. But my favorite part is this. So you have your before and then after. Here we go, before, after. This is seriously the greatest thing I did. Before, after. Okay, and then this one I like to show because of the berms and basins. You can see that it just looks like a hole. And so a lot of people are like, you know, again, I don't want a bunch of holes in my yard, but if you're like, wow, that's if this was being installed at your house and you saw that, you might be like, oh, that's a big hole. Like, but look, you can't even see it because it's integrated into the landscape, and it's not meant to just be this hole. It's meant to be a basin that has flowers in it. And the way that you do your pathways is since they are a raised area, you put your paths on the berms. And so they're a raised area anyway. And so you're not walking into the basins. And so I could go on and on about this. I know I'm about out of time, but here is a seasonal picture of what it looked like, which I think is also really important, the before and then the seasonal, because rain gardens and gardens in general look different at different times of year. So I'll stop there, but thank you so much. I'll take any questions.
Thank you so much, Jessica. That was very informative and enlightening. I have a quick question.
Yes.
So in our area, there are a lot of HOAs and condo complexes. Do you have any suggestions about how a homeowner or a owner there could implement a rain garden with the HOA regulations in place?
I'm so glad you asked that question. So I have been looking at reducing the amount, reducing the barriers to why people can't install rain gardens. So one of the barriers that we found is that people don't know what to plant in a rain garden because it's different plants. You have to plant something different on the bottom than you do at the top layer. So that was one. The next is that people don't have really great examples of what rain gardens look like. And then even if they want to install one, a lot of times people want help still. So I just received grant funding. We're starting this project this summer of creating layouts that are done by our horticulture department here at CSU. And we are creating 6 to 8 planting layouts, 2 full sun, 2 full shade, 2 partial shade. So then we're going to be using these layouts and we have partners up and down the Front Range. So it's with, I'm getting to my point, I promise. It is with the city of Greeley, the city of Fort Collins, Mile High Flood District, Northern Water, and Centennial. And they have sponsored planting 19 demonstration rain gardens in those areas. So we're going to take these layouts and plant them and then monitor all of the pictures. It is my hope. So 2 of these, at least 2 of the rain gardens will be in HOAs. So it is my hope that once we have these examples, we have pictures of what they look like, we can have testimonials from homeowners, and then working with that particular HOA, that we can have planting plans and layouts that could be just taken to HOAs to approve. Just to say, look, they're not going to bring our home values down. Here are the specific plants. Here's what it looks like, to really enable it to be easier for homeowners to not have to come up with the planting plans themselves, not have to hire someone to design it for them. They'll be able to take this planting layout. It's a plant by number design, kind of like color by number. You just take your plant and then plop it in based on the planting layout. So yes, we're hoping to be able to work with HOAs to make it easier to plant native plants, and especially rain gardens.
Amazing. Awesome.
I have one question for you, Jessica.
Yes.
It's a little bit of a side thing, but I was wondering, like, in some yards they have like raised flower beds, like maybe they've got it around like in front of their house where it's like brick, like a box, and they've got bushes and stuff. Does it work just as well, or is it not suggested that you use that almost as a rain garden where you can, like, it comes right off the roof and then you could actually put it into where the boxes are instead? I guess, would that still work, especially if maybe there's a sidewalk in between? Or I've seen, wasn't sure if that works as well. Is it better not to have like any kind of structure that it goes into and it just goes into the dirt?
So a couple of things with that. It depends if sometimes people put a liner underneath their garden boxes. So if that was the case, then the water wouldn't be able to go deep into the ground. It would have to come out the sides of the garden box because the water has to go somewhere when it's overflowing. I have seen those used very successfully. So like Odell Brewing Company up here has rain chains coming down from their downspouts going into like a raised planter type of a thing. So I would much rather have a raised planter with water going into them than a downspout going onto a sidewalk, because at least there is some infiltration there. I wouldn't call that a rain garden per se, but still using that water and keeping it on your site beneficially, it's simulating some of the same beneficial impacts for sure. So yeah, I like that as well. You have to be cognizant of what happens when that water fills up that structure. So it's just going to overflow like a bathtub on all sides if you don't have a low point, where like in a rain garden, you're creating a low point so that you know where the water will exit your rain garden. So you just have to have somewhere where you know the water will go and that it won't go next to like a foundation or something else like that.
So maybe you put even like a drainage hole or point at the low point of the yard or whatever in the box itself. that would
Yes.
point out to the right direction and that we
can-
would leave in the right place.
Yeah, you can
Yeah.
definitely do that. I would just say, since you're concentrating the water coming out, to put erosion protection down there, down where where it's exiting, so that it's not creating a muddy mess at the bottom of your planter.
No, it's great. It's great ideas. And I love the plant ideas too. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.